Nyawiskano Swogoiko, Rebecca Bowen Nikiaso, Alge Junika. I'm thankful you are well. My name is Rebecca Bowen, and I'm of the Bear Clan. I'm here to talk about Seneca women, and it's a cultural way that when you talk about the people, when you talk about the culture, that you begin at the beginning. And for women, we're very much a part of the creation. In that particular account, there's a sky woman who, for one reason or other, falls from the sky world. And as she's falling down into this watery void, she's protected by great birds, and they bring her down, and the water animals come up from the bottom, and the turtle comes up, and the birds help her to softly land on the turtle's back. And with that account, it shows, like in no other creation account in the world, that women have a very vital role in our society and in our culture. Women account in this creation for the beginning of humankind, giving birth to good and bad, giving birth through death, bringing about the corn, the beans, the squash, and even the sacred tobacco plant. In this way, women played this vital role that continued on even into the creation of the great law of peace that was brought by the peacemaker. In this particular account, as the peacemaker is coming down and spreading this message, he brings this message that is difficult for the people to accept, because it is a message of peace, and it was something that wasn't amongst us at that time. There was great discord. We lived in a society that was very vengeful, and there was a lot of fear. There was one woman who accepted this message of great peace, and because of that, he gave her the name Jokonsase, and that means new face. And that was a very special name, a very sacred name that even to this day is carried on. But she played, again, a vital role for women, and because of that, the women play a very vital role again in the great law of peace. So as we're coming down through time, we see the role that women play in creation, in bringing about humankind, and we see the role they play even politically in the establishment of the great law of peace. And because of that, we came into a time here for Seneca women when there was just a great role for us in the great law of peace. And in that particular role, the women had the power, the authority to raise up and to depose chiefs, to declare war, to make peace. The women had their own councils, and so this was very much a part of our way. When the Euro-Americans began to arrive here, they came with a different understanding. They came with a different worldview, and in that particular worldview, women did not play a vital role in their society. Women were basically looked down upon. They were considered to be not as human as a man, and they were not respected in that manner. So when the Europeans arrived here, they looked at the women, and then they looked away, and they saw only the men. They saw only the roles that the men played in our society, and the women were kind of pushed to the side. And as that relationship began to grow, because as we know, the Europeans arrived, and every part of their culture began to touch every part of our culture, and we were just so impacted by that conflict that occurred. And so because of that, women were forgotten, and even the men in our society were urged to push the women aside, to deny them the role that the women had known for generations, since time immemorial. And with that, it was very difficult for Seneca women to come out of that. And it took a very long time, and that in itself took generations to overcome. In 1848, with the establishment of the Seneca Nation of Indians that we know today, with a written constitution and a tribal council, with that particular constitution, the women lost their vote, essentially. Prior to that, as I said, through the Great Law of Peace, the women had their own councils, and they had a great deal of say. When treaties were made, the negotiations occurred throughout the day, and these negotiations took place between government representatives and the men of our nation. But at the end of the day, it was the women who could make the decisions, because the men would take that information and essentially take it home, and the women would talk about it and discuss it and give their advice to the men. So that relationship was really impacted in 1848 when the new Seneca Nation of Indians was established. In that new constitution, the women did not have a vote. They were referenced only in that the women could have authority in a vote as far as the sale of land, and that was it. And the only ones who could vote were the men. So while that was a great political change as far as laws and so forth, in my heart I feel that the women still had a great deal of authority and power in the community and in the home. And while things were changing culturally and viewpoints were being changed, and that the women still owned the land. Being a Seneca still depended on the women. The bloodlines went through the mothers, and so the women still had these pivotal roles. So in that sense, we were able to continue, and the women had a great deal of responsibility for taking care of the home front and so forth. And there was really a flip-flop, if you will, of roles, in that prior to this era of treaties and our loss of lands and the establishment of the Seneca Nation in 1848, prior to that time, the men were the defenders of the people, and the men were the warriors, and they went out and about, and they protected us as a nation, you know, and they built our homes, the long houses, they cleared the fields and so forth. But it was the women who took care of the home front once that was all done. It was the women who took care of the long houses, who took care of the gardens, who took care of feeding the people. And so after 1848 and in that era, in those years, those roles changed. And the men were urged to become the farmers, and essentially to put down their weapons of war and of power, and to become farmers. And the women were urged just to be at home and tend to the children and so forth. So and that was a difficult time of adjustment. And of course, when you have societal adjustments like that, they're not always successful. And it led to a lot of problems. We were really inundated at that time with a lot of issues. You know, the people were being dispossessed of their land, of their homes, and there was disease, there was poverty, and alcohol, and all of these sicknesses, these illnesses were just making a nasty brew for us. And so with that, and we came out of that with, you know, all of a sudden we had a new form of government, and not everyone was in favor of that. And so that was a time of conflict amongst us for a number of years after 1848. But through those years, all the way up to, in my research, I found that in the records of the Seneca Nation, we don't see any real effort by the women to regain that vote. And up until actually, I would say the 1930s. And that is not to say that didn't occur. We can only go according to what written records we have, and it's not referenced. But women did appear in council, in the tribal councils, all the way through the late 1800s, and they spoke. They went to court, and you know, records show that the women owned the land, and they could, you know, through, I guess in a lot of ways, being politically active, they could still, you know, display their power. And so you can read that in the minutes. There are indications through other records that there were organizations for women, such as what we would know, I guess, as sewing societies. In that time, they call them a benevolent female society, and that was in the 1800s here at Allegheny. And these are predominantly I guess what you would call the Christian Indians who participated through that. The Presbyterian Church was very strong here at the Allegheny and the Cattaraugus territory, and so they encouraged the women to come together, and they would make quilts for the benefit of those who didn't have such necessities as that, and they helped in different homes and so forth. And up into the early 1900s, we see a women's society out at Cattaraugus, and they are active. They are going to council, and they're speaking about some of the issues. They have concerns about the land and what's occurring as far as what we know today to be gravel pits and so forth, and they're seeing land, as far as the actual materials as natural resources being removed from us. They're concerned about the cutting of timber, and they're also concerned about the children who are in the Thomas Indian School, and what they are going through with some of the policies there in regards to their annuities. So we do read that in the record, and I think even in my personal experience as a young child, having been a young child at the time of Kenzua, and even in those earliest years, the women still had no vote in the very early 1960s. The government turned to the women to participate on a lot of the committees that they established. They established committees to develop a plan for building communities, rebuilding the communities, the homes, having some sort of recreation, and so a lot of women participated in those committees.